Hello and welcome to a Madcap book review. I'm Mad Capsules and I'm here to review the first book in the Palace of Fires trilogy by Bill Bennett. Now this is my very first book review for the channel, so please be gentle. It's been a long time since I last did a book review, probably way back in primary school or elementary school for the American folk out there. So let's see how we go. Firstly, who is Bill Bennett? He's a bunch of things, really. He's an Aussie, first and foremost. He's a film director and an author who began his career as a journalist. So he's been around. Now, don't think he hasn't directed anything of note, whatever that may mean. Take a look at his filmography in your spare time, and I'm sure there'll be something that you've at least heard of if you haven't seen. So effectively, he's had a lot of experience with both writing and with storytelling. And now he's written a thriller, fiction, horror trilogy, whatever you want to call it, the Palace of Fires trilogy. So what led me to actually read this book in the first place? Well, to be honest, it was the subject matter. The cover of Initiate, as you can see, shows a blackened or a black goat's head with an inverted pentagram between its eyes. Now, this is right up my alley. It seemed potentially to be along the same lines as the novel I'm currently writing, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't treading a path that was already trodden. Of course, not that anything is truly original these days, but still, just wanted to double check. And the good news is it's very different to the story I'm telling. And lastly, it's because he's a fellow Aussie. Generally, this wouldn't really matter, but with the other two items already in his favour, it was an easy decision, and it just meant I absolutely had to read the book, so I did. What actually led me to review this book, though? So the reality is I wasn't going to review this book, to be honest. It is a good book, but I was going to keep away from book reviews until I knew that I had enough time to be doing a lot of reading, and it's still not where I'd like to be. I don't think I'll be able to do book reviews very often, so this may be the first and last book review for a while. We'll see how that develops. However, I did read a few unfair reviews of this book on Goodreads, and I really felt I wanted to set things straight. There's absolutely room for opinion in reviews. In the end, that's what reviews really are, in my opinion. They're entirely tainted by the reviewer's opinion. However, a bad reviewer tends to forget this and presents their opinion as fact. And this disappoints me, so I really wanted to provide a fair review for this book. Now, I did buy a physical copy of the book, so it's not the longest book in the world, but it's not a bad read. Interesting cover, good quality. I'll quickly read out the blurb for you, just as a little intro. So, 300 years ago, Lily's ancestor broke a solemn promise signed in blood, and now she's thrust into a shadow world where Satan is real, witches exist, and evil is an ancient living thing that seeks to wreak havoc and rule. The dark is coming, and only she can stop it. And that, having read the book, it is a pretty damn accurate summary of what happens in the book. Is it misleading? To be honest, no. But maybe the blurb seems to make it be a little bit darker than I thought it was, having read the book. So, Initiate begins with the tale of Lily Lennox and her mother Angela. Without spoiling too much, it is a tale of good versus evil, white versus black, the forces of life against the armies of Satan. These armies consist of witches, white and black, to easily outline who is who and what side they're on. And this initial book shares the tale of a new initiate into the white witches, which, if it isn't already abundantly clear, is of course Lily herself. In order to structure this review, though, I've decided to tackle the three main complaints that I found irked me in the Goodreads reviews. Namely, 1, that the book is poorly written, 2, that the characters are underdeveloped, and 3, that the story itself is all over the place, which I'll define a little better shortly. Now, a number of Goodreads reviewers suggested that the book was poorly written, and personally I take umbrage to this suggestion. I didn't write the book, but, I just felt it was a little bit of poor choice of words. To be honest, I feel that the reviewers that suggested this were perhaps looking to compare this book with something from a writer such as Stephen King, who puts a lot of detail into his work, and as a result their prose is very long and flowing. And that's an unfair comparison. Initiate is written in a very different style, a style that I myself prefer, and it's a style that I also am writing in, which is why I took umbrage, I guess. It's fast-paced, it's action-packed, and it has little time for too many details. This does not suit every reader, admittedly, but it's far from poorly written. In fact, there were several times while reading through the text I felt the writing was exemplary. For the most part, it forgoes wasting the reader's time, which is great, and it simply aims to entertain, and it does that in spades. This, again, is not for everyone, but it's unfair and perhaps even a little pretentious to dismiss it for this reason. Further, some of these reviews mentioned that the dialogue was clumsy. And it is from time to time. I have to admit, yes, it is from time to time. But personally, I find dialogue hard. It really is hard, and what one reader may see as perfectly natural may not come across that way to another. So getting dialogue right is pretty tricky, and I admit that at times the dialogue here felt pretty unnatural, but I don't think it had an overly negative impact on my experience with the book as a whole. Next up, character development. In a book like this, character development can be difficult. So again, because it's fast-paced and it's not really designed to appeal to those that are in it for the characters themselves, at least not initially, books in this style tend to share the characters or the characters' stories over the series as opposed to within a single part of the narrative. And it's the action within the story itself that's intended to carry the reader through each chapter and thus through the book as a whole. By the time the reader is well into the next book in the series, they often then realise that they're also invested in the characters because they've learned more as they've gone along. It's really difficult to pull off, and it is definitely something I'm worrying about with my own book. Does Bill Bennett pull it off here? Not entirely, if I'm honest. The characters do tend to feel a little bit flat and underdeveloped at times. Almost some of them seem to be put in place to meet a narrative need instead of feeling like they have an actual place within the world. That said, some of the characters are heavily developed, so I think it's not something you can use to describe the book as a whole, but something you can use to describe specific characters only. So it almost feels as if those that are less focused on in this first book are potentially going to be developed further later in the series. And I look forward to seeing whether or not that is actually the case. Now, Lily herself is a strange one. I can tell that the writer was looking to portray her as being a little feisty and independent, and I can also tell that she needs to be this way in order to become the character she probably needs to be by the end of the book. But she does come across as pretty rude at different times during the story, and arrogant as well. At least initially, she's not really a likeable character. This can make engaging with the story a little difficult. It did make engaging with, say, the first third of the book a little bit difficult, and this can be a problem, but I felt that the larger story was intriguing enough to pull me through. And she does change significantly later in the book, perhaps a little bit too quickly though, in my opinion. I did feel as if the last section of the book was maybe a little bit rushed through. Lastly, the structure of the story can be a little haphazard. It does frequently change from perspective to perspective, and often does require the reader to figure out exactly who it is they've suddenly switched to. The number of perspectives is also a little overwhelming, so there are up to 10 different characters within the book that at least have one chapter dedicated to them. And I did find this a little over the top at times, but at the same time I also felt as if it progressed the story in a satisfying way. For the most part, without experiencing each character's perspective, the book would have suffered, I think. Maybe just the way it was employed was a little clumsy. Anyway, overall, I'd have to say that I enjoyed Initiate. Personally, I really enjoyed it, to be honest, reading the whole book within 2 separate sessions across 2 days. So it didn't take a long time to read. As I mentioned before, it's not the longest book in the world, so it won't take most readers long, but it is certainly action-packed. it is entertaining, and it does present a world that clearly lives within the mind of the writer at the very least, and I look forward to seeing where it will go next, and hopefully to see that world develop a little further within myself, the reader's mind. But that said, I wasn't 100% on board with the idea of good and bad witches. Didn't really gel with me, but I guess that was more of a personal preference than anything else. However, my own experience aside, I'd have to give Initiate 3 mad capsules. While I did like it overall, I do have to agree with some of the criticisms, but I don't agree that these make the book a bad read. Unsurprisingly, several of these reviews even mentioned that they didn't even finish the book. If you're a fan of fast-paced, action-packed stories, particularly those within the realm of the supernatural or the horrific, I definitely recommend you give Initiate a look in. So, thanks for watching my very first ever book review. Future book reviews are unlikely to follow this structure, as it was one based on other reviews, which is generally not how I do reviews. But if you like my style in general and the way that I've covered this book, please do let me know. Alternatively, if there's anything I could perhaps have done differently or elaborated on further, please also let me know as well. It can only help me improve. Keep an eye out for more Madcap reviews. Like and subscribe if you want to see them when they're released, and hopefully I'll see you again someday. Bye.